Can we begin the second session of this day today? I am Professor Madhu Rajput from University of Lucknow. I'll be conducting this session, which is on Tibetan literature inside Tibet and in exile. Our first speaker is Tenzing Gyatso, Negotiation of Neglected Aspects of Tibetan Diaspora in Sunday Skora.
Good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank TPI for giving me this opportunity to present my paper amongst all of us present here. The topic for my paper, the title for my paper is Negotiation of the Neglected Aspects of Tibetan Diaspora in Sunday Skora. I'll be reading out my paper, but I'll try to substantiate whenever it's needed. So I'll begin. Pre-1959 interests in Tibet and its culture have resulted in Tibetan studies, and most of these studies have mainly focused on the portrayal of Tibet as Shangri-La, a mythical name of a hidden Himalayan valley in James Hilton's novel Lost Horizon, 1933, and Tibetans as noble savages who possess esoteric knowledge superior to the West notion of civilization. This epithet, noble savage, is first used in Tibet's context by Jan Magnuson. Peter Bishop, an Australian researcher, in his book The Myth of Shangri-La, 1989, established the term Shangri-La as a concept in Tibetan studies. When the 14th Dalai Lama, followed by several thousands of Tibetans, took refuge in India and eventually in other countries thereon, they found themselves welcomed by eager Western audiences who profess familiarity with the Tibetans. This familiarity is actually with an exoticized Tibet and Tibetans they have come to identify through all the travelogues and other popular genres of writings on Tibet and its culture. Jan Magnuson, in his article titled A Myth of Tibet, Reverse Orientalism and Soft Power, notes the emergence of two genres of Tibetan studies, both founded upon the exotic and utopian side of Tibet myth. The first genre comprises of those travel accounts written by missionaries, Christian missionaries, explorers, British civil servants, and military officers who had some experience of living in the pre-1959 Tibet. These narratives are often modified and exoticized to fit the contemporary image of Tibet assumed in the West, and are usually done so under pressure from the publishers. The second genre too mirrors the first by starting with reports about the exotic religion of Tibet, which, according to Magnuson, here I'm quoting Magnuson, quote begins, part of the Western reinterpretation of Asian religions, unquote. The second genre, New Age literature, is represented by books such as The Bardo Guidebook, 1991, which is by Chögyam Nyima Rinpoche, and Sogyal Rinpoche's bestseller, Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, published in 1992. I would like to add another popular genre of autobiography, Rangnam, and biography, Namthar, to the list of Tibetan literary genres created by Magnuson. While there is a lesser degree of representation of the myth of Tibet in the third genre, all of them, however, emerge in response to satisfy Western desire and expectations. Laurie Macmillan, in her essay, New Age Namthar, Tibetan Autobiographies in English, notes a common feature in almost all the Tibetan autobiographies written in English, which is that they are mostly written by Tibetans who identify themselves, quote, Buddhists as nationalists and as exiles. These apparently are the exemplary Tibetans who can inspire readers in English, unquote. The first genre, the travel accounts written by the outsiders about their discoveries in Tibet, in my opinion, has no formal or informal note of approval by the contemporary Tibetans, which is to say there is no direct collaboration from the Tibetans. The writing of the first genre nevertheless proved useful to the later generation of Tibetan in exile, as the very attraction which draws the West toward Tibet and its people has its genesis in the myth of Tibet, which is religiously mapped out in these travelogues. The other two genres, however, are products of mixed phenomena, the first being the Western expectation of a representation of Tibet, and the second being the active participation of the few elite and educated Tibetans in their strategic acceptance and portrayal of the ready-made Orientalist image of Tibet and its culture created by the West for Tibet's political gains. In these popular genres, the portrayal of Tibet as Shangri-La and Tibetans as mystical species who possess supernatural power needed to save the West civilization or modernity from complete degeneration overshadows the political urgency facing Tibet. The non-Tibetan supporters of Tibet cause are mostly drawn to the Tibet freedom movement because they fear that if Tibet and its race were to be completely eliminated by China and its communist policies, the West will lose its last savior. Tibetan studies which focus on the exposure of active participation of the Tibetan diaspora, predominantly the first generation Tibetan elites in exile, in the exoticization of Tibet, in order to rally political support from all over the world for the Tibet independence movement, emerged in the late 20th century with well-researched and well-argued works by Tibetologists and anthropologists such as Donald Lopez, McLagan, and Christian Klieger. In their works, they not only talk about the inseparability of the self-representation of Tibetan culture and the way Tibetans are popularly perceived and imagined by their Western supporters, they also denied the Tibetans their long-held status as passive victims of Western Orientalism. The popular journals of Tibetan diasporic writings mentioned above, along with those brochures and pamphlets circulated by active agencies of Tibetan freedom movement, exclude all those features which are supposedly irrelevant to the independence movement in their representation of Tibet and its culture. Those features which are generally ignored by these popular journals are the socio-economic situation of the Tibetan diaspora, the cultural assimilation, the internal discordance amongst the Tibetans, particularly between the newcomers and those who are born and raised in exile, are some of those features completely ignored by the popular Tibetan literary genres, which flourished after Chinese invasion of Tibet in 1959. Dibesh Anand, in his article, Reimagining Nationalism, Identity and Representation in the Tibetan Diaspora of South Asia, talks about this, quote, conscious and selective presentation of self, unquote, by the Tibetans, not only in their literary works, but also in other works of art and commerce, and calls it Tibetan hyperreality. This term, Tibetan hyperreality, is actually coined by Klieger and not by Anand, but Anand actually quotes it from Klieger in this article I mentioned. In my paper, I have associated the careful and, to an extent, incomplete representation of Tibetanness with the popular writings produced by the first generation political and religious elites under the influence and support of Western friends of Tibet. The radical second generation Tibetan intellectuals who were born and brought up in exile no longer catered to the mythical image attached to Tibet in their expressions, be it in the form of active political protest or in their writings. They no longer believe in the middle way approach, which involves non-violent negotiation with China with regard to granting Tibet genuine autonomy, which designated the political stance taken by Tibetan government in exile, then headed by Dalai Lama. This term genuine autonomy is first used by Dao Nubu in his article, Tibetan Views of Tibetan Autonomy and Agenda for the 21st Century. This term is not explicitly used in the Star-Spoke proposal, but was later used by Dao Nubu in order to differentiate between various shades of autonomy surrounding the politics of Tibet. The Chinese intransigence frustrated the Dalai Lama's repeated calls for a negotiated settlement on the Tibet issue, finally forcing him to declare in March 1995 that the whole question is open to public debate. I quote Da Nubu from the same article I just mentioned. This intransigency on the part of China may have forced the second-generation Tibetan radicals into taking the contradictory political stance by demanding complete independence for Tibet as against the autonomy of Tibet maintained and propagated by the Tibetan government in exile. The most conspicuous of the radical Tibetans are the pro-independence Tibetan Youth Congress and Jamya Nubu, a Tibetan writer and a political activist. Tenzin Tsuntu belongs to this second generation of radical Tibetan youth. Tsuntu may not explicitly articulate his disapproval of the middle way policy in his writings, particularly in Kora. He is, however, identified as a radical by the Tibetan community for exercising radical tactics, something he's notorious for, in his demonstrations of protest against Chinese oppression inside Tibet. The liberty I took in categorizing Tsuntu as a radical is also backed by Tim Johnson, who quotes Tsuntu in his book, Tragedy in Crimson, How the Dalai Lama Conquered the World but Lost the Battle with China, in order to support his claim that Tsuntu belongs to this radical Tibetan youth. And Johnson quotes Tsuntu in his book. Quote begins, "Only an independent Tibet can guarantee the survival of Tibet, nothing else," unquote. He continues to quote Tsuntu in the next page. This is from an interview with Tenzin Tsuntu, and I think it's an informal interview in Dharamsala, and he quotes Tsuntu in the same book I just mentioned. "For us, nonviolence is not a strategy, it's a principle of life. But our nonviolence is not the Dalai Lama's nonviolence, where it's all talk, talk, talk. The younger generation's nonviolence is confrontational, aggressive nonviolence. Where there is injustice, we go there and fight. We'll receive the beatings, we'll go to jail, we'll fight court cases," unquote. Tsuntu's Kora rejects the notion of Tibetan hyperreality and constructs a never-before-seen image of the Tibetan diaspora. The Tibetans portrayed in this anthology, along with the poet persona, do not at all fit the authentic identity of Tibetan people, represented by the works of the first-generation Tibetan refugees, in concordance with the Western expectations. They do not resemble those endangered species of Tibetans who are on the verge of extinction, as portrayed in the travel accounts. They are completely different from the Tibetans who are supposedly the sole possessors of a supernatural power needed to save the West from its ultimate spiritual corruption. And finally, they seem to lack the spiritual clarity and patience, which are supposedly the inherent characteristics of Tibetans. Rather, the poet persona of the poem, "I'm a terrorist," identifies himself with all the things violent and grotesque, and in this way contradicts all those fantastic claims made in the three popular genres I just mentioned. And this is from one of the poems from Tsuntu's Kora, "I'm a terrorist." "I'm a terrorist, I like to kill. I have horns, 2 fangs, and a dragonfly tail. I am the humiliation you gulp down with flattened nose. I am the shame you buried in darkness. I'm a terrorist, shoot me down. I'm a bullet, I do not think." While the Tibetans in the poem and the poet persona are undeniably exiled Tibetans, their national do not correspond to the one popularly propagated by the third genre, the biographies and the autobiographies of high lamas and the Dalai Lama. There is a conscious effort on their part to dissociate Buddhism from the national politics. The old man Tashi meets during Lingkor in the short story entitled Kora. Kora is the short story from this book, Kora. Do not show any sign of regret and embarrassment while narrating his and his fellow warriors' successful and violent attack on the Chinese armies. He seems rather proud of it. So this is an abstract from the short story. Then he screams. He in this abstract is the old man. Ki, we entered, the old man informs Tashi as an aside. He raises his sword high up in the sky against the snow peaks and brings it down in a slash and immediately crosses it with another sharp slash, slanted towards the wayside bush. In his next move, he lunges it at Tashi. Still holding the stick against Tashi's chest, he says, "We killed rampantly." Chundu fleshes out the dilemma faced by many second-generation Tibetan refugees like him when it comes to being a Buddhist as well as dutiful Tibetan fighting for Tibetan freedom, which can be particularly seen in his poem Betrayal. Chundu understands the caution involved in the Tibetan government in exile's peaceful approach towards freedom movement. However, he could not help but think that he had betrayed all those freedom fighters as he, under the influence of the education he received as a student in Tibetan village schools, and also due to his great reverence for the Dalai Lama, whom he personally, personally worships as the Buddha that he is, forgave his enemy. Those freedom fighters, many of whom died in battles and others who managed to escape Tibet's intolerable situation, do belong to the first generation of Tibetans. Tibetan exiles, but are not part of the elite exile elites. The poet persona, who is also interchangeable with the poet Chundu himself, is nevertheless also able to resist complete indoctrination suggested by the educational system of the Tibetan government in exile. He successfully manages to convert the symbolic R embossed on every Tibetan's forehead, according to his teacher, from a passive refugee to an active Tibetan tongue, Rangzin. Chundu translates Rangzin on the next page as freedom. The most important figure in Kora, according to me, is the Tibetan in Mumbai, from his poem with the same title. It is in this character that Chundu's Kora most successfully fight against the exoticization of Tibet and Tibet's culture done by both the Westerners and Tibetan diaspora. The Tibetan in Mumbai is eons away from the image of mystical and saint-like Tibetans represented in the popular Tibetan literatures. He is an opportunist whose conscience does not quiver when he pretends to be a Chinese, who is commonly assumed by all of us as our enemy. No one likes to be called a Chinese, but he is okay with it, the Tibetan in Mumbai, in order to land a job at a Chinese takeaway as the Chinese cook. Yet, this is a quote from the poem, "Yet he gets angry when they laugh at him, ching chong ping pong." This is some of the stanzas I quoted from the poem, the Tibetan in Mumbai. He sells sweater in summer in the shade of the Parallel Bridge. They think he is some retired Bahadur. The Tibetan in Mumbai abuses in Bombaya Hindi with a slight Tibetan accent, and during vocabulary emergencies, he naturally runs into Tibetan. That's when the Parsis laugh. The Tibetan in Mumbai likes to flop through the Midday. Midday is a local newspaper in Mumbai in those days. Loves FM, but doesn't expect a Tibetan song. Okay, the Tibetan in Mumbai represents a majority of Tibetans in exile who struggle every day for livelihood in someone else's country. The poet's mother's response when he asks for the accurate date of his birth. Chundu, in one of the stories, actually talks about this incident when he asks his mother for an accurate date of his birth. And the mother's response was, "Who had the time to record a child's birth when everyone was tired and hungry?" So this question Chundu's mother asks, according to me, could not be a clearer expression of the hardships the first generation of Tibetan exiles went through when they first migrated to India. The Tibetan in Mumbai knows that a Tibetan song will never get featured on an Indian radio channel, and he knows he cannot survive in an exiled nation if he caters to the image of Tibet and its culture popularized by the Tibetan literature of the first generation elites. He can hurl abuses in perfect local Hindi dialect, regardless of his Tibetan accent. And a lifetime may pass before anyone notices or realizes that he is a Tibetan and not some retired Bahadur or a well-trained Chinese chef. The elements in Kora which define the popular Tibetan literature corresponds to those elements which represent and feature the reality of Tibetan diaspora. The disillusionment with the middle way policy, the plight of the non-elite first-generation Tibetan refugees, the assimilation of the host country's culture, language, and identity into its Tibetan counterparts, etc., are some of the elements which is seen throughout Kora. The poet Persona says in the poem My Tibetanness, and this is a quote from the poem My Tibetanness, I am more of an Indian except for my chinky Tibetan face, unquote. The negligence on the part of the popular Tibetan literatures towards the reality of Tibetan diaspora facing them daily, directly or indirectly, highlighted in the comparative study of these popular genres and Kora, should strike every keen students and audiences on this particular literature. And indeed, it did strike many researchers working in this field of Tibetan studies. This recognition of the complicity of Tibetan elites and exiles in forging an image of Tibet as Shangri-La and Tibetans as capable of rescuing the West civilization from degeneration also led to the eventual discovery of conscious attempts on the part of Western supporters and Tibetans to convert Tibet's political cause.
I think you can conclude also.
Okay, how much time do I have?
You conclude. You have read a very good paper, so you just please conclude.
Okay, yeah, I'm almost there. Okay, I'll skip to the next para, or I can just read out this. This is actually from the Strasbourg proposal, which happened in France in 1988. I highlighted this part because I also talked about how the Tibetan cause has been integrated into a universal problem where it's been integrated and made into something which is not political but rather ecological or environmental issue. And in this Strasbourg proposal, it also does this, but in the humanitarian context. So this is a quote from that proposal. Into a zone, the Strasbourg proposal too, in my opinion, does this, although in the humanitarian context, as it desperately urges China and the rest of the world to recognize the importance of a free Tibet, which will be converted into a zone of peace, a sanctuary in which humanity and nature can live together in harmony. It can become a free heaven where humanity and nature live in harmonious balance, a creative model for the resolution of tensions afflicting many areas throughout the world. Okay, I'll try to conclude. I tried to differentiate between Tibetan diaspora and Indian diaspora and how it's different from each other. Like in case of Indian diaspora, there is no yearning for the imagined homeland. I mean, there is no barrier which actually stops the Indian diaspora from returning back to their homeland, while in case of Tibetan diaspora, there is. But I also try to compare African diaspora and Tibetan diaspora and how they are similar, like there is this constant longing and yearning for the imagined homeland. And there is this unique feature of Tibetan diaspora, which is the yearning for the homeland is actually accompanied by an imagined reality of a bountiful Tibet, in contrast to the relative poverty they face in the host country. I mean, the Tibetans in exile, they have imagined this reality of Tibet, which is always bountiful and plentiful, unlike in India. Kora, in its perfect embodiment of those temporal and spatial aspects of the Tibetan diaspora neglected by the popular Tibetan literary genres, proved capable of resisting the strong desire of living up to the Western expectations in its representation of Tibet, Tibetans, and their culture. And Quora also demonstrates how Tibetan diaspora is a unique condition and therefore signals a call for a rigorous attention urgently needed to this aspect of Tibetan studies. Thank you.
Thank Thank you. You have presented your paper very well. In fact, it is an answer to many questions which we are facing, that after 5 decades in India, Tibetans, how the younger generation has the yearning for independence even today. As far as Indian diaspora is concerned, I think after the Second World War, most of the nations have got, like Asian and African nations, have got independence. I think Tibet is the only nation which got, which went under Chinese occupation. So I think there is a lot of difference in that, and that is another thing. But I think the person you have talked about, I think he has gone to jail because he had been protesting against the BRICS summit in which the Chinese presence was there. So I think we come to the next paper of ours, which is by Dorji Sharing, Past and Present, an Ideological Contestation in Resistance.
Thank you for the introduction. I prepared my paper in English, and only after coming to the conference, I thought that, okay, I'm going to make the presentation in Tibetan so that I would receive more suggestions from my comrades who are attending this conference. The irony is that the source of my paper is based on literary works written in Tibetan. But then it's quite difficult for me to all of a sudden, present it in Tibetan. So here I'm going to make my presentation in English. My paper deals with basically, and of course there is a change in title as well, because the title that you find in the schedule is different from this. And the one that is there in the schedule is a kind of tentative title that I have conceived, and I sent it to my professor. And he said that I need to rework on it. And then after having discussion, this is the result now. But then thematically, it's almost same. My paper deals with the contestation between tradition and modernity in Tibetan resistance. And basically, I focus on literary works, how those literary works project that contestation between tradition and modernity. But basically, tradition and modernity, it's a kind of problem that has plagued the whole world, especially during, say, 19th century was a kind of period during which colonization reached to its zenith. And from that onwards, the Asian and African countries that came under the European imperialism, culturally, there was lots of a kind of problem that took place within those traditional community. And then especially in today's context, we have this problem of neocolonialism in the form of globalization and mass media. And this globalization is also, neocolonization is also playing a big role in extending or intensifying the territory of multiculturalism or multinationalism. And because of that, in such a juncture, actually, especially countries which had been traditionally intact, and these countries, the kind of situation that these countries are facing is a kind of serious threat, a threat not just for the security reason, but culturally, this is a problem for most of the third world countries and marginal communities, I can say. And now the contestation between tradition and modernity, I'm not going to speak from a general perspective, how the world is facing the problem between tradition and modernity, but rather how this contestation is taking place within Tibetan resistance. But then, when we think about the contestation between resistance and or tradition and modernity within a resistance movement, and the Tibetan problem is not first of its kind. When we look back at the kind of resistance movement that took place in the history of Africa against European colonization, one of the best examples is negritude. Negritude is basically, it started from 1930s, and this movement is attributed to some of the intellectuals in Pan-African movement like Aimé Césaire and Léopold Senghor. And the very nature of that negritude movement is embracing, as I have written there, embracing the blackness. Because the European colonization, when Europeans started that colonization, colonization is not just a territorial colonization, but then how Europeans, they mentally occupy or mentally colonize the African countries or the African people. And negritude is one such movement that started celebrating everything which is being termed as backward, barbarian, uncivilized, all the aspects of African life. And then negritude is a movement that celebrates or valorizes the past. And this movement had not been a kind of unanimous movement by the African against European imperialism. There are lots of African intellectuals within the movement, or not within the movement, but in the resistance movement who have spoke against to this, the concept of negritude. And this is a quotation from a speech given by Léopold Senghor, who is part of that negritude movement. And here he says, the African is as it were shut up in his black skin. He lives in primordial night. He does not begin by distinguishing himself from the subject of study, the tree or the stone, the man or animal, or social event. He does not keep it at a distance. He does not analyze it. Once he has come under its influence, he takes it like a blind man, still living into his hands. He does not fix or kill it. He turns it over in his supple hands. He fingers it, he feels it. The African is one of the worms created on the third day, a pure sensory field. So here what we can understand is that the African as backward or African as intuitive, something which is very not, don't have that scientific approach towards study. So he's trying to project that European concept from a different perspective, as African as a kind of race that has emotion, African as a kind of race that can feel, rather than studying the objects from a scientific approach where there is no emotion. And then, as I told you before, negritude is not a synonymous, a kind of unanimous movement, and there are lots of African intellectuals who have opposed that movement. And Soyinka, in Edward Said's Culture and Imperialism, he observes Soyinka's attitude towards the negritude. Soyinka notes that the concept of negritude is the second inferior term in an opposition, European versus African, that accepted the dialectical structure of European ideological confrontation, but borrowed from the very components of its racist syllogism. Thus, Europeans are analytical, Africans incapable of analytical thought. Therefore, the African is not highly developed, whereas the European is. So there is that ideological confrontation between tradition and modernity within that African resistance movement. And now I'm going to speak about how this is what I want to focus on, how there is a contestation between tradition and modernity in Tibetan resistance. When I say resistance, I'm referring to the resistance against Chinese. And my primary sources are how that is being reflected through literary works written in Tibetan. Because the very concept of modernity, or Tibetans speaking for modernity, or Tibetans speaking against tradition, when we go back to the history of Tibetan literature, that could be traced from early 80s. And early 80s, if you go back to 70s and 60s, okay, even 50s for that matter, what we can understand is that Tibetan as a society or as a community has gone through a serious transformation in the form of cultural revolution and the occupation of our country. So, and this has, I think from my perspective, yesterday, again, Singala has spoken about some education policies. And because of that education policy, some of the youngsters who grew up during 80s and 90s, they have a different perspective towards Tibetan tradition. And Getobla has spoken about that it is not only about the education policy, but then apart from policy, education policy, what are the kind of books that they read? And the suggestion that I want to make is the attitude of a particular writer cannot be summarized based on the kind of education policy and the book that he reads. There are important factors in the formulation of a particular attitude, but then historical experience is also important, I think. It's not just about education policy and the kind of books that he reads, but then the social experience that the particular writer had. And that also influences the theme of his writings. So when you look back at 80s and 70s and 60s, and 70s and 60s had been historically a very troubled period, and that has paved for the writers to think from a different perspective. And one such idea that Pema Bum has shared in his book, Mirab Sarpe Nyingam Ki Pharding. And he said, the psychology revealed in the new poetry, and this is not just new poetry, but even in the context of short stories as well. The psychology revealed in the new poetry is determined by modern condition. Poets inside Tibet know what kind of difficulties their ancestors went through in order to bring Buddhism to Tibet, and how they honored and served religion from generation to generation. Wearing sheepskins, their ancestors met offerings of fine silk, drinking plenty. They met offerings of butter and milk. Dwelling in yak hairs and tents, they constructed countless temples. Now, Buddhism is unable to offer another answer. They are disappointed and think for the first time, well, what use is Buddhism? In this world, there is no hope for refugee except in oneself. So I think this is the kind of mentality that not all the Tibetans, but then some progressive Tibetans started looking at life from this perspective. And because of that perspective, a different kind of writing came into being. And when a particular generation goes through a kind of drastic transformation and hard time, it is very general that the perspective towards life changes. And because of the change in the perspective, new literary form also emerges. So I think these, whatever I said so far, and could be represented by the kind of literary works that came into being in 80s. So when I was going through, and one thing that I want to tell you is that my reading is very limited. But then whatever kind of literary works that I read so far, and what, I can categorize that into three different categories. The liberal one, here I'm referring to the kind of writers who ask for transformation within the tradition, but they are not completely rejecting the traditional aspect of Tibetan life. And then there is radical writers. Radical writers, here I mean those writers who completely reject Tibetan tradition, mainly Buddhism. And then another group of writers, ambivalent writers, especially, okay, I start with the ambivalent. Pema Sidhen, the one who makes movie. And I've gone through his short stories, and what he does is that he neither takes sides with either tradition or modernity, but rather he just brings out the kind of tension that is there between modernity and tradition, and he presents it to the audience. So this is one aspect. But then I'm not going to speak about this, the reason why, because he's not taking any stance. Okay, now I'll start with liberal. Under the category of liberal, I would include Tundup Gyal. Because when we go through his short stories and poetry, of course, during his time, he faced severe criticism from the community, saying that, okay, he's against Buddhism, he's against Tibetan tradition. But then when we go through his writings, what we can understand is that he's not completely against Tibetan tradition, but rather, I understood him as someone who asked for a kind of transformation within Tibetan tradition, and transformation that fits the modern needs. So this is my understanding. And because, okay, let's say Tulku is one such example where he's not criticizing Buddhism, but rather the people who are involved in that domain and how they practices in the name of Buddhism, how they creates problem within the society. And Seki Chumbe Metokta, and then Dokta Takta. Again, the kind of traditional norms which is prevalent in the society and how this creates problem to the people. He speaks about that. And Langsu Phöpcho and Kanglam Tam, these two works, he directly speaks about the change, the need for the change in tradition. And the radical writer, actually, Shogdong is not a creative writer in the traditional sense, actually. But then he has written many works. And Shogdong is one such writer because the tradition of forming writers group or coterie became a kind of fashionable trend in Tibet since 80s. Shogdong belongs to one such group, which is Kebashi. And when I was reading about what is the purpose of Kebashi, because every writer's coterie has their own ideology and their different way of writing. And Shogdong belongs to that Kepashi. And Kepashi, the very objective of Kepashi is they really think that Tibet is a backward country, a backward community, and by introducing Western philosophy, they can enlighten Tibetans from ignorance. So that was the primary objective of that Kepashi. And based on that, and then when they say that they want to introduce Western philosophy, and when I was reading those books, you know, the kind of references that they made is, they're not referring only to the Western philosophers, but then there are scientists, mathematicians, but basically these people, they are taking inspiration from Western people who brought a drastic change within the community. And that has contributed, I can say, for the development of Western society. Okay, yeah, I'm good. I will conclude from this.
Yeah. No questions?
With the permission from Chair Dr. Madhu Rajput, the one thing I need to, clear, actually, the connotation that Tibetan diaspora, and then I would like to speak in Tibetan, and I will come and I will conclude in English, ma'am.
Okay, okay.
So because this is very important,
Okay.
I feel like that. Thing is, the current Kejmotungu Shuena than the Tibetan diaspora, Indian diaspora. Ngarangi Sambatana, Tibetan diaspora di ngazugi Madina yaga tushera diaspora le di danda ngazugi kongla danda di ngara samju rai di thiwayek me Indian diaspora, Chinese diaspora, African diaspora sti shuda ngarang gi khoda diaspora le de chambala khande jil kugu idilla de chambala mi khangsa da ji lungba yejo jik che lungba so so rangjeng imba jik che di ani lungba shemba jila immigrate chene 소수교 초회 된다 이내리 롭종 된다 이내리 다 간다마다 초와 야든지 토네 다 딘데기 다단지 토네 룽바 심발 도니 안 룽바 심바 디 나랑라야 다 racial discrimination 라고라다 지 메리 게 다단다 딘데기 토네 지야 개신 소수교 룽발 개신 레스다 딘데지 루구두라 안아가지 티베탄 다이아스포라 레드 잠발라 nga주 당보레 레야 고라 당보 딘데기 ngô 토넬레 마리 nga주 데 nga주다 Tibetan diaspora ki chap dila Tibetan refugee lana tinne la kheba du samgudura mangbuji jigne fashion do tinde do thone Tibetan diaspora tinde sumguda chijan digi diji du chambala nganjo ya thugya nyangas chumbu du Chinese diaspora le yari nganjo chijan nganjo ki Tibetan diaspora da Chinese diaspora du chamati thanda gora takda gor de meba dos thungudura digangla ya di jik tuna da tinde nang to boyena ani yabu yongsare issueira ma'am, actually, I'm going. No, I will come in English, ma'am.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is that it is not actually suit to use the Tibetan diaspora. So what I suggest that we have to use the Tibetan refugee rather than use the Tibetan diaspora. Yeah. So
This is what I was also, I did say it because here people went out for work. You people came because of political compulsions. And as a group, it is a group mobility here. So I think that is the main difference, because once you go out of choice for work, that is a different thing, and sometimes by compulsion also. Anybody else?
Nga this samjich. Tibetan diaspora like tik di jidang ni tik di color ta nidu chebu du laure di wala da kaza koi la nishi sejil da capture nija chuorya it's either force chigo da force machigyo nija chuor kalan African diaspora like tik ta ngajo pheba ji context bula diaspora di tik di pheju che di mid 1990s la start chisya the criticism mangbuda yor the diaspora tik the use chi khaji thunda the main the tik the fashionable the tik the trend na la le dore benchana Indian diaspora doina nima Indian overseas Indians to laoria and in overseas Indians inzula negative connotations mangor ta kunju capitalist to relaja susu khaji this lifestyle yaga yunga chi di chige kabla to gyore to mde ini jela ta di diaspora Indian diaspora chadu de la positive connotations bi mangbuleria diaspora lai di chig di ta pijinga pyramid doina gangla sha and di wala refugee exile ani forced or stateless ta khari na mena chinju da this color ta force political compulsion lessa on the da ani for better lifestyle on the diaspora the stick nidu chembu do chasa ani exile the refugee din so ani this kachi wala counterparts to chiga indi to chalit
Thank you for the presentation. So I have two questions to Tenzing Yangjila. The first question is when I saw this Chunti's poem, Aggressive Non-Violence, somewhere in your presentation. So I could not understand exactly the aggressive non-violence. That is one thing. And another question is that Chunti said his non-violence is different from this, His Holiness Dalai Lama's non-violence. So, what the difference is. And then my one question to Dorjila. You use the progressive Tibetans. So what that makes sense, so what that refers to, the progressive Tibetan. Thank you.
지와들 투지나 the tinzi jindu gi korang gi koa khardi ta ngi kola personally ngi ki jithira ramasra ine ta ngi gi di la oh okay I don't know what actually Jindu meant by aggressive nonviolence, but because I didn't actually talk to him and I tried to avoid autobiographical interpretation. I tried to focus on the text, and the very purpose behind quoting this interview from the book is to justify my claim that Jindu is a radical rather than radical. Jindu belongs to that radical generation and not to the traditional conservative generation, which I associate with the first generation Tibetan intellectuals. As far as the differentiation between his idea of nonviolence and Dalai Lama's idea of nonviolence, I think this is a fairly recent book. I think it was, this book is published in 2011. So, and while Korah is published in 2002. So I think Junji had become more radical as he read or as he knows what actually is going on with the international politics. So I didn't talk to Junji about it, so I wouldn't know what he actually meant. And the very purpose behind me quoting that instance is to justify my claim that he's a radical intellectual rather than conservative. Thank you.
The question that you put, progressive, probably I might have used in a wrong context. But then the disadvantage of not reading the paper is because I spoke with the purpose of, because those who read paper, don't take offense, but generally I don't prefer to read my paper. The reason why, because I have a kind of personal experience. When I go and attend conference, those people who read paper, it's quite difficult for me to understand. But then whether I have that capability or not, but wherever I go, I tend to speak very openly without referring to my paper. I don't read my paper. So probably that's the disadvantage when you present a paper, because you are spontaneously speaking, and then here and there, you may not use right words in the right context. So progressive, if you want me to change the words into another one, I would say rational Tibetans. Someone who are not, what should I say, highly influenced by the traditional values. Traditional value, I'm referring to those traditional values which has something to do with superstition. One thing that I really want to make clear is that I have spoken about those writers who resist Tibetan tradition. But then there are lots of writers who speak for tradition as well. I have not spoken about this aspect. The reason why, because everybody knows that the whole world has an image of Tibet as a traditional country, a country that preserves their culture. In order to bring out a different image, okay, there are certain group of Tibetans who object this view. So this is my intention.
I think, shall we conclude then? Okay. Okay, there is a question. You can ask.
Thank you. I would like to thank both the speakers for their presentation. In fact, I have no question. I have a request for Dorji Sring. I wonder how influential the street talks, the street songs, in that point in time, in resistance movement, and whether there is any influence in decision making at that point in time in Kashak or in the elite Tibetan leadership. The
Yeah, I
importance
understood
of
your
street
question,
songs
yes,
and
yes.
street talks.
Yeah, I understood your question, but this the question is not something directly related to my paper. But since I have written a paper about Tibetan street songs, sometime because yesterday one of the participants he has asked a question. Mangshe is my folk song. Goldstein has written a paper about the street songs. That became prevalent in Lhasa at some point of time, since from maybe Getesri Laha Kudokore, since from 19th. Because when I went to the document, the kind of collection that I had is mainly belongs to 19th century and then 20th century. When you go through the lyrics of those songs, what I have understood is that, because usually when we speak about folk people, we are referring to people who are living in countryside, who don't have good knowledge about life and they are not educated. But then when you go through those lyrics, what I suspect is that could an uneducated Tibetan who lives at the countryside has that kind of political knowledge that is happening within Lhasa. So from context, thematically, this is my, I have one question. And then in terms of wording, lyrics and everything, again, I doubt that could an uneducated Tibetan write that way. But then, when you look at 60s and 70s, even in 80s also, the same tradition had been there during that time. When you look at those things, they have that flavor of folk. And I don't know whether the kind of prevalent songs that came into being in the street of Lhasa, whether that has made any influence upon the decision making of the Tibetan government, I don't know. I don't have any idea about that. But then it's very powerful, because what I felt is, when you go through those songs, and without even reading Tibetan history, some of the important things that has happened in the Tibetan history you can understand only by reading those songs. Thank you. Let's
Kadon de Manshes Labdita Nangan dishes Janitroson. She did dig Rigla Manshe Labio Mari. Tom Jurgi she digs Labios. Shagabe Jeranola, Tom Jurgi she did your Gani Taganashi Shagabado, Mito Chibagi, Ani Sosu Luju Tishawa. Pena Kungo Kemen Dasag Luju Tishabanola, Yore, Kungo Shasu Tishaba Lujunala, Yore, Tom Jurgi this Labios. That in Jungun the Shivaina, Tambu Munechena, Man Rangatan Yorta. Take Karisna, Sasa Melam Sudutan, Melam Chumak, Chulenka Dogenki, Melam Chumaki, Suji Labgame Maybe, Ranshin shed in the town Yonche, the Ranshin shed down but the Mahopana, any cause of Lundenda with the Yungu Yoris, Lundenda with the Yungu Yoris, JJ. Then a Jarorambuchi, Kum Hatun Kola, and Lasak Melam Chumaki, shed down the Katula, Shake Darla. Suna Somala, Singanabu, Trin Somola, Singanabu, Shake Darla. Then the town into Tanya, and a Jin Chimo think, and a tra suit in the Tungu Yoris, because the Jin Chimo Lasala and the thing Chibujavior, Shingama Tigi Mari. Tainayo, Tumju Chit, the Notachi Yori, Karsna, Shugo Deva, Kuta, Nangu Tapzuk. Ani Tumjuku Chit, Mang the Sus Tom Matum, the Sugatom Matam, Meric Tony, Tindila, and Juje, disguised Chajerva, and Kuta Penzu Patu Kapte Chare Chaja, and She Surge, and Mang Tapsu The Lawless Debo Yor, Karsna, Javakuntin Tupataya Jamso Gulu Nashi, thick the two guns. 근데 인도단에 로르스는 되고 아니 인지게 깨자면서 캐치 빼마시 디요. 빼나 네 홉데 템버 찍라 라사라 남메기도 나라 셰샤브로 탑게 보모 포롤렘바스인지 포롤렘바스인데 다 남메기도 그 보모레 아니 통분 체가도 꾸다 된소게 배조단 거였다. 아니 모랄라 포롤렘바 딱인데 고 값셔바게 딱버리스기요. 값셔바게 딴 삼삼다 깨단 거요. 제제 아니 가로지 값셔바 보모 딜레 로충와도 또 넘바 야가저도 아니 포롤렘바를 카당 저러봐. 아뭐 섭다 요마 딱 가려고니 가지 잘래 요마 가려고니 카당 저러봐. 가로지 포롤렘바 생판 저러봐. 밍라 포롤렘바 따번난게 수레스. 보모 메세나 주번난게 수레스 제제 셰당지 파당 버리. 가르스나라 디 값셔바 코랑이라 뭐게 메세나 주버 마도 뭐고 팔치요 말와. 저한테 대화타야 jansuke gulu nangshi ko devoyo then 가서 devo 답변은 차이가나 참도 쇼renga 때다 ngandu 축자 되셔 다 되드 점주기 시득 망셔 다 파카당 요 수카당 요다 lumba 강요 다 점주기 시득 가시 단데 저런 걸 나왔는데 저가는 해 탄네 아니 그런 그 집을에다서 찍어요 시접 로산타시슬라 뭐부 공부타시슬라 데부 분조타시 타시 넘버 숨기 첩시 타시 제송슬라 가르나 안두 공부타시르와 시접 먼저 루칸다 아니 로산타시 제 세모와치다 캬우지도 아니 세모와치 시접 로산타시르와 구순 다변겐 다변수리 딱라 분조타시르와 제가 너는 배벨 로스라 내가 정말 다들 셰샤브로 탄나다 내가 정말 다들 다시 지지기 여러봐 제단 첩시 엔다 정말 깨도 콘도스는 그 다시 제송 제제 아니 단다 가리스 동사 대동 단다 홉디 젠도도 코란 기타다 대동 홉디 민탱금도 코란 그 지브레스 톱된 상보사 텐로 Koran Tedung Karso Shaktan mean the Tengmento. Koreg in this Jiberes Ketayor, 60s now. Just the Tanya take a technical term Momati, Tom Jurshit, Tom Patagas Yusha, and the Yur says Yorba, Tino, Tom Jurshit Labuyota. The Tagas at Nembe, Pina young Ming person, ya, she Takaka then attend you.
I think, is there anybody now? No? Then I think we come to the end of our session. Thank you so much for your patient hearing, and I thank both the scholars for giving us some views of theirs on literature. I think literature, art, and culture, they are the parameters of how rich one's country is. And as an Indian, I can surely say that Tibetans do have that. Thank you so much.